Battlestar Galactica Season 3, Episode 4, Exodus, Part 2 is over, but we have to go fracking down the hatch here on RHAP. We know scripted TV, where we are going down the hatch each and every week, talking about BSG. That's Battlestar Galactica. Hello, everybody. I am Josh Wigler, and jumping into the conversation for a very heroic rescue mission, which God knows we need right now. It is the great Mike Bloom. Mike, New Caprica is no more.
Yep, got completely razed to the ground. Though I'm imagining the mental scars and physical scars and maybe a couple characters' cases will certainly linger. It is interesting that, again, we got to keep reminding ourselves that one of the core tenets of Battlestar Galactica is that things move at an incredibly fast pace.
Yes.
While it was a year and a half for the rest of them, it was a combined 4 episodes for us, really, that we spent time on this two planet before it promptly gets abandoned. And we're basically, from a locational perspective, back where we started before like the halfway point of the season 2 finale when they said, oh, the Cylons are gone.
See, I was over here thinking that you were going to say the core tenet of Battlestar Galactica being all of this has happened before, all of this will happen again, just in some of the ways in which this episode feels prescient. Prescient at the time, prescient now. And I'm personally very hyped to talk about this episode. I needed this episode. I would have been thrilled to talk about this episode under different global context, but this is the context we have, and I think it's a really good episode for people who are, feeling down, who are feeling really scared right now. This episode of Battlestar Galactica, one of those rare moments of victory and hope and success for those who have been oppressed and those who feel like there's no chance and those who feel like they are hopeless, that all hope is lost. Sometimes the people who you think you could rely on once upon a time but are gone, maybe they've mobilized, maybe they've organized, and maybe when the time is right, they're ready to strike and ready to help. And so we'll jump right into it here, Mike, to talk about all of that. Of course, this is Down the Hatch. You can send in your feedback each and every week to downthehatchrhap@gmail.com. You want to search for Down the Hatch, Battlestar Galactica, wherever you get your podcasts, to hit subscribe. Mike, tell me, Exodus Part 2. I've been so hyped to talk about this episode. This whole thing, Exodus as a unit, and really the New Caprica arc, which is now over. We've left New Caprica. Some of my very favorite stuff of the show, and I also wish that it lasted a little bit longer. But what's your take? Where are you sitting on the other side of this episode?
I mean, if I had a nickel every time an episode called Exodus absolutely blew me away and brought together every sort of like near communal aspect of this sprawling ensemble cast, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but maybe it is nowadays in this new Caprican culture, though. I don't know. I guess before the Cylons invaded, like, were they bartering for things? Were they using coins? Did the coins have their edges cut off?
Of course, had to. We can't have full circles.
Yeah, but this felt like coming full circle again due to the fact that, as I mentioned before, halfway through the season 2 finale, we have Brother Cavill like put his hands up, basically saying, "You got me," and then says, "Oh, by the way, the Cylons are done with you. They don't want to stoop to your level, and so they're gone." And so we had thought, okay, this is really a change in the status quo, and now we find sort of a reversion back to the status quo, and that I'm going to imagine moving forward, at least for the foreseeable future, we're going to be back in the mode of, okay, the fleet is on their way to go find Earth now, and the Cylons are chasing after them. Maybe a bit of a question mark because the Cylons do leave this episode with their MacGuffin swaddled in their arms. So maybe that might not necessarily be the case. But especially looking between last week and this week, I thought this was absolutely spectacular. And I mean that in every sense of the word. It was a spectacle. I mean, even from like a visual effects perspective, I did wonder if Ronald D. Moore is like apportioning the budget to Battlestar Galactica. Are we going to have like 16 bottle episodes to follow here because of all the money they spent on all these huge space battles and the Big G falling and jumping? I mean, it really was so well done. I think we quite literally killed off some of maybe the more unsavory parts of the New Caprica stuff, which, while I agree, while captivating, we've got 2 seasons of, spacefaring moralistic battles that part of me really missed it. And so I'm happy for many reasons that Bill Adama comes and swoops in. And to go back to the point that you started your entire statement with here, I mean, you said it many times during our course through Lost. Lost meets you where you are. I think safe to say it's the case with Battlestar Galactica as well. We will be here. We will be your constant through some of the most difficult times, but totally agree. It was some very nice timing to have an episode of television show where all these people working together, whether they realize it or not, through efforts both, on ground and high above in the
Yeah.
air. It really ended up being this sort of like perfectly timed series of events from a lot of our major characters who were able to get personal and overall victories to culminate in, once again, a bit of return to normalcy, despite the fact that one of the reasons why they founded New Caprica in the first place was a return to normalcy.
It was an attempt at a return to normalcy, and look what happened. And so it takes Bill Adama and the fleet coming up from the skies to come on down and save the day. So let's talk about exactly how that goes. Just quickly on a couple of things that you said, I do want to note that this episode of Battlestar Galactica, you're talking about how it was like a spectacular visual feast. This is an Emmy-winning episode of Battlestar Galactica. This episode
Is this the first Emmy the show had won?
I'm not sure, but it won an Emmy for Outstanding Special Visual Effects for a series for this episode. So major props to this episode. Another thing that now we can flip the card over on now that we know that the new Caprica arc is over. It's twofold. Thing one is these webisodes that precede Battlestar Galactica Season 3, I believe, at least in terms of storyline. I don't know. I can't recall if it was released before the season aired or not. That shows a bit of the resistance in that 4-month period. We'll watch that next week. We'll tack that on to our episode 5 conversation. I wanted you to experience the new Caprica arc as it's rendered on television.
Draw me in the middle of it. Let me get my footing like a lot of people.
You just never know how good a webisode is or not, and I haven't seen them in a long time, so I wasn't sure. I really felt strongly that you should start where we started and like go straight into the tie hole. And beyond that, I knew that we were going to be done with New Caprica fairly quickly. So let's talk about those webisodes on the other side of the actual New Caprica arc. So that's thing one.
Okay, I hope there's a lot of great foreshadowing in there. Like I imagine Ellen Tigh kicking back, taking in some spirits, being like, "Oh, this is like poison to me."
Oh, poor Ellen. So that's thing one. Thing two is that the reason it seems, this is according to Brendan Fitzpatrick behind the curtain, who is going back and listening to all of Battlestar Galacticast with Mark Bernardin and Tricia Helfer. In their coverage of Exodus Part 2, they explain that Sci-Fi really didn't want them to stay on New Caprica for too long. They wanted to make sure that we weren't going to be stuck on New Caprica, that the show was going to continue to be the show. It's a show in space. They wanted it to go back to space. So they had 4 episodes that they could be here for. And I think that was even feeling like a stretch to Sci-Fi. So that's the reason why episodes 1 and 2 of season 3 air in a single night. And I believe that these episodes, Exodus parts 1 and 2, also aired in a single night.
So that we 2 weeks.
So even shorter in the real time, which I think is quite interesting.
That's really interesting. And I know this is, I guess, only 9 minutes in that I make the first comparison to Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but certainly a commentary that was being done at the time. I didn't watch it at the time, but I certainly heard about this behind the scenes, is that during production and release of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, a lot of fans were a bit reticent to hop on originally because the concept was it was on a station. For the first time in Star Trek history, it was not wandering around the galaxy. And so while the stories do end up picking up a bit with season 3 and start getting into like some of the best Star Trek has to offer, part of the reason how the creators are able to assuage that is that they bring in the Defiant, which is just like this random runabout ship that they're able to repurpose basically. And then you start seeing, not coincidentally, a lot more increase in storylines of, okay, so-and-so get on the Defiant and go take care of this thing off the station. So yeah, I think it does show that even back in those days where BSG is so nouveau, they still have to listen to some overlords at the end of the day. You know, like the Cylons are following their own god. It's safe to say that the show was as well. And so it kept them there for maybe not a long time and maybe not a good time if you ask some of these characters.
Depends on who you ask. I think for a time at least, Aaron Dorrell was having fun. Let's get into this episode. Let's recap. Let's also remind folks you can watch this on YouTube if you want to check us out. The We Know Scripted TV YouTube on RHAP. Seek us out if you want to watch video versions of this. No Halloween costumes currently being worn. So
Do
Exodus,
we have to check in every episode to let people know?
Got to make sure. Exodus Part 2, Mike, begins with Lee and Dee, and they are having a conversation in their quarters on the Pegasus. This is on the other side of Bill Adama telling his son, you go on. You are responsible for carrying the torch of humanity forward while I go and play cowboy on New Caprica. And Lee is not feeling good about this because he feels very strongly, not just as an opinion, but as a military fact, Mike. He says, they're doomed. This is not going to work out. They're all going to die. And Dee is trying to, kind of assuage him a little bit here of you've got this, man. You could be the leader that humanity needs. It's all right. It's going to be okay. But Heavy lies.
I can't even convince the executive producers to not put me in a fat suit.
To get me out of this fat suit. Yeah. So Lee is feeling a bit despondent right now, while Dee is trying to be the moral center here and the Jiminy Cricket on his shoulder of telling him, look, we got to find Earth because if we don't, there will be no one to remember your father or his sacrifice.
Yeah.
And he's like, oof, well, when you put it that way.
I mean, he's gone full Limo at this point, stewing in his own feelings because, yeah, I mean, we talked about this last week that the two of them have certainly had their moments saying goodbye to each other, but this one does very much feel like it had that underlying implication of I'm making the sacrifice play, son. There's a good chance I'm not going to come back. So whatever you do not be the Deus Ex Machina that's going to sweep in at the last second and come save the day. And Dee, I think, is able to make sort of the historical pitch that Adama made in his big pump-up speech last week, saying, if you don't push ahead, there will be nobody to remember the name William Adama or a Battlestar named Galactica, which I thought for a while would also be the fate, Josh, if BSG was not picked up by a streaming service after Peacock had dropped it. So I guess the big question is, let's sort of mentally connect the dots here.
Yep.
Because the next time we're going to see him, he's like freaking Gandalf and the Rohirrim coming over the edge of Hell's Deep, saving the day. Do we think it was just Lee being like, that was a trick? He knew he wanted me to swoop in at the last second.
I don't think so. Especially based on there's that moment coming up later on when they're taking heavy fire and Bill is like, all right, we can handle two Cylon base ships, and then another base star comes in, and then another, and Bill is like, well, guess that's it.
He does the full Titanic violin player, right? Gentlemen, it's been an honor serving with you all.
Yeah, and everyone probably looking at him like, wait, what? You mean, because if he's breaking character. So no, I don't think so. That I think with the way that he talks to his son when he sees him later, it's I guess you didn't understand my orders. So I think that it's a really a moment of Lee kind of being a lot like his father, actually, and trusting his gut and rolling the hard six, just like his father is right now. So two hard sixes is better than one, Mike. I think is what Lee is figuring out.
It would have been interesting to see what would have happened if things went so awry when Lee charges in to save the day. Who was the next in the chain of command? Because at least Lee had the sense to make sure that, the civilians were still taken care of. Who was the person that was left behind with all of the Vipers to take care of the remnants of humanity when all the most important people with the last name Adama have left them behind?
Yeah. I don't know.
Who's the Kiefer Sutherland designated survivor in the bunker? Who's the Laura Roslin?
Oh, maybe it's Kiefer Sutherland.
Oh, you know what? That would have been to be like a reverse Michael Keaton in Lost, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, here's this named actor that we're actually bringing in halfway through the season to appear as the new guy to save humanity.
Indeed. All right. Well, let's go down to New Caprica, where we are about to say goodbye to a character. One man's loss is a Mike Bloom's gain.
Don't put it like that. I didn't will this into existence.
As we're about to lose a character that Mike has not liked historically on this show. We're in the insurgency bunker, and Sam is like, telling Tigh, like, she gave them the map. She's responsible for the ambush. If Sharon had died, this whole plan would have been toast. And Sam says, like, look, man, you know what we got to do. And maybe you should be the one who does it.
Which now does make sense in retrospect, considering this is the guy that was like, so if you need me to kill the baby, I could kill the baby. Like,
yeah, Sam's lethal.
I mean, remember, this is a guy that spent a good portion of time, like, barely scraping by on Caprica. Arguably, he is probably the most hardened out of all of them. As much as Adama likes to come through and say, like, look, we are at war. I have the most experience. Anders is like, yeah, I mean, I kind of just had to, like, I don't know, live off the land and eat my own shit for, like, 2 months before you came and got me. So screw rolling the hard 6. I know how to roll the hard 12. At this point. Give me all the dice. They're all 6s. You got to kill your wife, Tigh.
Colonel Tigh is going to bring a cup of tea, some poison spiked tea, and bring it over to Ellen. And he sits down with her, and she explains, like, the long road that got them to here. That, like, once Saul had been
long swirling road, if you will.
It's actually a twisting road. That Ellen tells him that once Saul had been taken, she infiltrated the Cylons. She started sleeping with Cavill. She would do anything to get Saul out of there. She would do it all over again, including giving up the map if it meant keeping Saul safe. And, like, Saul doesn't even get a word in before she takes the cup and says, I'm really thirsty. Can I have a sip of that?
Yeah, it's bad. I mean, like, first off, Michael Hogan's performance, it's fantastic here. Obviously, not like the huge story of the episode, but I'm going to be really intrigued to see what we do with this character moving forward. But yeah, to your point, trying to read his one-eyed reaction is so interesting, especially rewatching the scene again, knowing how it ultimately ends, because it almost seems like he is, like, frozen in abject fear.
Yes.
And we could certainly talk about, to Anders' point, whether this was necessary, whether, I would say incarceration exists. The justice system exists where you don't need to necessarily kill your wife on the eve of, like, possibly reuniting with the remnants of humanity and, getting everything back to hunky-dory. But you could tell from his face that, like, I think especially once it's revealed, and I mentioned it before, that, like, I don't think Saul, if he had been told about what she did for him, would have been like, oh, honey, I love you. Like, I think he was so committed to the cause that he would have said, like, that's fine. I should have gone back there. Like, as long as the cause moves ahead, I don't mind possibly dying or losing my other eye at the very least in a Cylon prison. But it is just sort of really making it terrible. Like, I don't want to make this comparison, but it's almost like putting down a pet where it's like he's looking at her eyes and he's like, oh God, you love me so much unconditionally and you did all these things, but you just had to give away state secrets. And I would imagine
which we know that pets are constantly doing.
Exactly. Listen, I always give my dog side eye. But the other side of that is also her kind of giving her own metaphoric nail in the coffin by being like, and you know what? I do it again too. And he's like, okay, no remorse. Oh God, all right. Let's do it.
But I think it's I really love this scene. I really do. I think it's great. Again, Mike Hogan, like you say, is just unbelievably good. But Kate Vernon, who plays Ellen Tigh, I think this is a really great performance from her.
It's a good landing spot for the character, and by that I mean on the bench as a dead body.
Yeah. She takes the cup. She drinks it and immediately says, I'm just the most tired I've ever been in my whole life. I'm the most tired I've ever been. my whole life. And
Do you think maybe he could have choked her by putting a hot dog down her throat?
oh God, no.
Well, actually, maybe that's how she got to the situation in the first place.
No. Hot dog is in a Viper. We'll see him later on. And so she takes it, she drinks it, and he finally speaks as she starts to like curl up, and he tells her everything's gonna be okay, just go to sleep. And then he lays her down, and it's like it's really sad. I think maybe your reaction to it is muted if you're really out on Ellen, but I think that the new Caprica arc does a lot for Ellen as a character, and I think is like a really good example of showing how extreme circumstances can radically change a person. Because I think like the way that Ellen plays in this season feels fairly different from the Ellen that we had gotten previously, that she would be willing to make these sacrifices, that she'd be willing to do this kind of stuff, and that she loves Saul ultimately so dearly. But I also think that calamity and catastrophe has a tendency to make you reprioritize, right? And like assess your priorities and what's important to you and what do you want to protect and what you can't live without. And clearly she's decided that that's Saul for her. And understanding like the unspoken or maybe spoken rules of the resistance, and understanding that her doing this, if it got out, which it now has, would not end well for her. This ends up being the outcome. And my question for you, Mike, is how do you read this scene? Do you read this as Ellen knowing what's coming and her drinking this intentionally? Or do you read this as she's really just so thirsty and she just wants a little drink and she ends up dying?
God, this is so tough because I'm certainly going to bring my own preconceived biases about the character into it. I do agree that I think, especially since the time jump, we have seen not a completely different Ellen Tigh, because again, it always seemed like she was someone who cared about her husband. I think it's more so the fact that like she was someone who was willing to like do whatever it took to get her husband ahead, much to the chagrin of myself and the plot in the first two seasons. And here she is more so serving as like the support system for this guy that is at the head of it. Again, compare her at the beginning of season 3 to the beginning of season 2 when she's like, nah, don't worry, they'll all fall in line eventually. Keep doing what you're doing, babe. I think that for me, I mean, first off, I think it was a really nice spot to end the character on. I mean, she even kind of like lampshades herself a bit by talking about like, oh, I do what I do best, frack anything that moves. I think, unfortunately, kind of leaning into some of the more unsavory tendencies of the character. But like the fact that she died protecting Saul, I think does speak towards her character, who had otherwise kind of been painted as being pretty selfishly motivated. You know, the first episode we experienced her with her,
tie her with everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Tie her up, tie her down, like she's trying to give
You've been smooching with everybody.
Yeah, she's trying to give Lee a foot job under the table. She's trying to turn like Adama and Tigh against each other. I will say, as someone who also likes Tigh, I thought it's going to be a really interesting plot point for the character as well, because this is a man of duty first and foremost. And despite the fact that he is firmly anti-establishment in this case, he has always been that establishment guy, which is why he was willing to throw himself into a prison and lose an eye for the sake of the cause. And this, to me, is such a stark symbol of that, right? That he was someone who was willing to really detach himself from the most emotionally solvent connection he has in order to, knowing that this was for the betterment of the cause overall. To go to your question as to whether or not she knew and essentially like took the self-sacrifice like a champ, I don't know. Like, I could understand on the one hand that you would imagine, okay, she is the wife of the leader of this resistance. Surely she knows the punishment for all this. But I don't know. From what I was reading with Kate Vernon's performance, like, I truly thought that she had a way out. That it was like, okay, he's going to be mad at me for this, but I have to kind of proceed forward and take the consequences as they did. And maybe I'm also taking that outcome because it also makes it like that much more tragic as well. That like the final moments are her cuddling up in his arms, basically being like, would do anything for you. I trust you more than anything in the world, as he is slowly but surely killing her.
Yeah. So people are split on this.
Oh, okay.
We put up a poll in the old PSR Discord where we still have a
Mm-hmm.
Down the Hatch channel. If you want to join it, again, you could just always email us, downthehatchrhap@gmail.com. Happy to let you in. And so the poll ran that 5 people voted that she knew, 7 people voted that she did not. Kate Vernon herself seems to think that Ellen knew. There was an old forum post of hers. I think there was like an AMA on sci-fi.com back when it was spelled sensibly, is what Brendan writes. But there's an archived copy of it, and in this forum, she seems to suggest that it's Ellen trying to take some burden away from Saul. But that's a very like actory thing. I think
That's
to
the
do.
thing. Yeah, we've talked about this a lot through our coverage of various series of Down the Hatch, right?
I think that this is like one of those great things where it's like up for interpretation. Where like I think you like it pushes and it pulls. Like I think that you can see it go both ways.
Yeah, I did just like that door. Yeah, I could definitely see it. I mean, regardless, I think it doesn't diminish the impact of the scene, which is, again, not even the fact that Ellen's like, it's okay, give me a drink, whether or not she meant it to, but it's the fact that Tigh is the one to tepidly, yes, but still hand the cup over to her. That, again, this is a guy that is so devoted, loyal to the soil, that he is willing to put his wife in it. That because she, of all people, was the one to cause this infraction, she had to suffer because of it. And then, again, the greatest tragedy, perhaps on top of that, is when he walks out of, the raptor at the end. He gets to see Adama again for the first time in 4 months, and he just looks like an absolute shell of himself. Even as everyone's doing their old awkward Adama 3-syllable chanting, like, he just walks away. He wants nothing to do with the Merryman. And I think we've talked about this a lot in the first 3 episodes, but maybe this is the most prominent example I can think of. You got the outcome that you wanted, but at what cost?
At what cost? At what cost? Anything else you want to say about Ellen Tigh? A eulogy for Ellen Tigh. Did you get everything you needed out of the character?
Yep, abso-frickin-lutely. We got definitely some less rootable elements in her first 2 seasons, and then a little bit of a softer landing in season 3. Though, again, that certainly does not obfuscate some of the various unpleasantries I had with this character, but that makes me happy she's dead. Not only because it felt to me like they didn't really know what to do with the character in a very productive way outside of just being this like perennial antagonist to the action that's going on, and B, because it does serve as such an interesting point of inflection for Tigh. I mean, it'll be almost like seeing a bit of Shannon post Boone, which was a little bit of an odd territory too, and only lasted a short amount of time. But I'm really intrigued to see what a post Ellen Tigh is going to look like. And well, I imagine he's going to look like he's still going to only have one eye, but like, can he truly go back home again now that his source of home is gone?
Yeah. So let's go to Colonial One, where Gaius Baltar is there nanny poo-pooing the Cylons a little bit. Y'all lost control. This whole thing is terrible, but if like you let me intercede, maybe we can figure this out. Like if you all just leave, maybe just go, just get out of here and we could just call it. And Deanna says, yeah, that being said, aren't you guys going to tell the rest of humanity all these stories of the Cylons? And how many generations are we going to have to wait until y'all come looking for us if we go away? Gaius says blood for blood has to stop someday, which I think is a great bit from Gaius right before like all hell really starts breaking loose.
Yeah, I mean, to see his mood in this episode is very interesting. He will have an ability and a will to be able to step up at the last minute to be like, all right, I want to prevent this planet from getting blown up. There's something I can do. And yeah, putting yourself in his shoes. This is, of course, a Cylon sympathizer in more ways than one, but he has felt quite powerless over the past 4 months. He's basically been a puppet meant to sit there and let these, these incredibly authoritarian people yell at him and tell him what he needs to do and basically have him become more traitorous as the days go on, that he is wishing death multiple times over the course of these 4 episodes, which I think also is a result of a cause of why he is so loose-lipped as well. Like, he truly does not give a frack at this point. He will tell the Cylons off because A, if he dies, as he says. But B, he does realize at this point that, like, at least up until the moment they decide to vacate, he was needed. He was this figure that was trying to be used by the Cylons to push their propaganda ahead. And so he is able to finally let his tongue loose a little bit and just talk about how bad your mass execution plan was. It's always interesting to also check in and see what Cylons are around. Maybe it's just an availability thing, but no Cavils to be seen in this episode.
Usually an availability thing, so Dean Stockwell must have not been able to hang for this one.
I mean, it also might have just been that, like, the Cavils unanimously went in hiding with their tail tucked between their legs after how much the mass executions failed. Not a sign of a Doral here, like a spare Simon appearance, but this is mainly going to be not even Six-centric, Deanna.
Yeah.
Hell, even Boomer herself is going to, say Adama's here, and that's her only line of the episode.
Yeah, Deanna's sort of the Cylon of the hour, for sure. So I think that you thought maybe, we don't have, we don't have a lot of time with Lucy Lawless. Like, what are we going to do here? But, clearly they're doing stuff with that character. So for sure to be continued on Deanna. Okay, so on the ground, as we're starting to see major explosions happening, that's the signal. Tori is the person who is going to be running all of this stuff and sending people off. Your team captains, you know where to meet, you know the rally points. We are still trying to protect Maya and Hera, and Sam is still and you're sure you don't want me to go there?
I know. Listen, I've got a gun right here. I can preemptively shoot it. It's no. And Maya, whatever you do, your one job is don't randomly die outside the Oracle's tent.
Just don't do it. And so Sam is going to lead an assault on the detention center. There is a secret cache of assault rifles and stuff in tunnels under the pyramid court. So they've been planning. You plan, and maybe you have a chance. And that's what Sam and the rest are doing here. Meanwhile, the Galactica is orbiting New Caprica. We're back. Helo's here as the XO. Look at that upgrade for Hilo, by the way.
Yeah, which is interesting because, we'll talk in a deleted scene that Lee was essentially demoted due to the loss of the Pegasus. Is it the same case for Hilo? Unless Tigh has to take a notable amount of time in emotional and mental recovery, I think Hilo might get a demotion as well.
Hard to say. Kat currently the CAG. Racetrack is the lead Raptor pilot. They're coordinating a mission to send a bunch of drones toward New Caprica to make the Cylons read it as battle stars, so that they'll be distracted. On Colonial One, Baltar's watching everything. He's saying that this is the end of everything. As you
know who's not? Felix Gaeta, who's just doodling.
Gaeta's just waiting for everyone to leave the room so he can make his move.
Yeah, exactly. He should have just drawn crude stick figures of the plan of him holding a gun to Baltar, who has blood coming out of his head.
Yeah. So we see base stars are jumping into orbit. They launch Cylon Raiders. Kat and the squad turn back around. Their part of this is done. We go to Leobin's apartment where Starbuck wants to know what's going on. Leobin says, "Shut up. Get away from me."
Yeah. And then, Leobin is going to just go out in the worst way possible in multiple ways. And this
Leobin sucks. Leobin sucks right now.
Leobin one punch man Starbuck, which he's don't leave us behind here. He's nope, I'll come back for you later.
On the ground, this is a really, I think, an interesting moment. Roslyn is telling Zarek, go to the shipyard. Zarek says, why aren't you coming? And she says, I'm going to that one. And she's looking at Colonial One. And what does Zarek say? He's you love the drama, basically.
Yeah.
He's good.
You're a messy bitch who lives for drama.
And I love it. Because Zarek tells this guy who's coming past him, and I believe it's Jammer.
I believe it's Jammer too. And it has to be Jammer because
Jammer says, Zarek goes, you over here. And Jammer goes, I didn't do it.
Yeah, it has to be one of the guiltiest things I've ever seen anyone do is that Zarek just asks him, hey, weren't you on Galactica? And Shimmer replies, yeah, but I didn't do anything.
I didn't do nothing. And Zarek is just like, here, take a gun and protect her. And so they say, we'll see each other up in space. And I just think it's a very interesting new place to land Rosalind and Zarek right now. Zarek especially.
Yeah.
Zarek watching out for Laura Rosalind just feels kind of incongruous with what we know about their relationship previously. But I guess it's it's very much enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, it gives me Legolas and Gimli of
yeah.
Never thought I'd die side by side by my political rival. How about dying side by side next to a friend? And I agree, it remains to be seen.
Nobody tosses a school teacher.
I am intrigued to see what we do with Zarek. I imagine they're going to slot him back to the role we got Richard Hatch in for the first 2 seasons, which is put him back on the Astral Queen if it still exists. Have him pop in from time to time. I don't know.
Agitate. Yeah.
I don't know if we're gonna resettle the Quorum of 12 or anything. I mean, with Baltar now vacating the office, I imagine that Rosalind's just gonna step into it without really any sort of complaints behind it. So I imagine Zarek's gonna kind of go back to the status quo, much like the show might be. But it is really interesting to. Yeah, considering one of the first times we saw him, he's basically, I demand that this imposter Laura Rosalind steps down. To have them go all the way to this extent where they're exchanging one-liners at each other and him pulling an incredibly guilty Jammer aside to protect her first and foremost, which did have me worried. I thought Laura Rosalind was going to survive this, but I was like, of all the people, don't pick Jammer. Don't pick Jammer. He might flip-flop to the other side. You just have to say the right thing to him.
All right, Mike. We have reached not just my favorite scene in the episode, but among my very favorite scenes in all of Battlestar Galactica, among my very favorite scenes in all of TV. I love this. This is, in my opinion, the unquestionably undisputed reigning champion of the jumps, and the reason why it is not worth ranking.
No.
Galactica is, we're on Galactica. Blue Squadron is ready to go. Adama tells everybody, brace for turbulence. And while we're on Colonial One, Deanna discovers that the Battlestars that they thought they were going towards aren't there. It's a dupe. Simon's wondering, where's Galactica? And then from the insurgent point of view, we look up into the sky, and there she is. The Big G has jumped into the atmosphere and starts plummeting like a rock, Hilo says. It's plummeting like a rock. Adama says, Blue Squadron launch. We see Hot Dog again.
I was actually thinking when I saw Cat and Racetrack earlier, I'm like, I wonder if Hot Dog's on New Caprica or not. But no, despite the fact that we were told that Adama and Lee had this skeleton ramshackle crew aboard, there was a good amount of named characters that remained with the fleet during the time of the settling of New Caprica.
Yeah, so the Galactica is able to launch Vipers. So we have all of these Vipers now suddenly, immediately on the scene when the Cylons are completely unprepared for it. And just before the Big G makes impact with the ground, we jump again. And the Big G was here, and the Big G is gone. And that was the plan. And that shit fracking owns. It is never not extremely cool, and it's just man, Bill Adama is the best. This shit's so cool. When we were talking about things to chart and rank and all of this stuff along the way, very quickly, very early, it was we don't need to rank the jumps. This is the jump.
No, this is the platinum standard.
Yes.
Of not only
there's
jumps,
still some good jumps coming up for sure, and
nothing
one that I think is competitive.
Oh, okay.
But this is the one. This is the one.
This was incredible. This had me quite literally on the edge of my seat and yelling in exultation when it ended up jumping away because, God, to say Will Adama has nerves of steel is an understatement. That he is willing to just plummet his baby, the flagship, in free fall to just have all the little Vipers deploy themselves so they don't have to get past any sort of atmospheric, enemies or anything, and they can just close in and start razing everything to the ground, and then blips out at just the last second. mean, this is why he's the
It's
best.
so cool.
Like, it sucks because there is so much happening in this episode that I think ordinarily I would give Bill Adama all 5 MVP points. But like, this to me, you know what this is? This is the Picard maneuver. Like, this is his calling card from my perspective. From now on, yes, the "so say we all" speech I think is remembered as the most trademark thing about it, but I think the more we find out that it was a little bullshit, the maybe the worse it wears on him. This to me is textbook Bill Adama. Well, I'm so glad that Doc Cottle saved him after, Boomer ended up shooting his, because only he could come up with such a wild plan. Like, Starbuck had some plans that she came up with that were a little wild card-esque last season. This takes not only the cake, but the whole freaking bakery.
It's for all the marbles, right? And so, like, if that's how you're playing, if you are playing for keeps, there's really just only one way to do it, and that's full tilt. And so Bill Adama, much like Colby Donaldson, goes full tilt here, drops down all the way to the bottom of the planet and jumps back up. And it's so rad. And I think you're totally right. Like, I think Adama has demonstrated himself previously, and certainly cements it if he hadn't already in this moment, that he's just so innovative. He's a very innovative strategist, and he is he knows that you have to go for broke. That no half measures, Walter. Like, you got to go full measure, or what's the point? And that's the choice he makes, and it yields one of the single coolest scenes in the entire show. But not without results, right? So we go back to the Big G, and it's just on fire. Dratus is back online. The base ships now know that they're here. They're coming for them. More base ships show up, and we cannot hold off 4. They're getting rattled around. They're getting shot at. They've lost maneuvering thrusters and all of this stuff.
Yeah, they can't jump away again. Basically, while this maneuver was an absolute badass, it basically crippled them. Like, they are sitting ducks right now to just wait for whatever happens until flying in like a Valkyrie is the Pegasus. And we even get the close-up of the name to indicate, like, yup, Lee defied his father's orders, but for the right reasons. You even hear Bill Adama being like, damn it, Lee, thank you.
Yes. It's a great shot where you don't really think that the Galactica is going to get destroyed, but like, it's lingering long enough and the music is like mournful enough that you do wonder briefly, like, what could the show look like without there's the Pegasus. And so the Pegasus roars in, and your boy, Lee Adama, no matter what suit he's in, is still fundamentally also a badass. He is also an Adama, and he has decided, much like his father, couldn't live with himself, right? He says, I can't live with it, can't accept it. I have to go back. Lee comes to find that he is his father's son. In that exact same way, he cannot leave these people behind. So the Pegasus comes in, buys the Galactica enough time, and Lee orders the Pegasus to go straight into the center of the base stars. Lee is doing this knowing that the way to succeed is to sacrifice the Pegasus. The only way to do this is to knock their ships out with his own. And I wish that they had coordinated this a little bit better, because at its core, the Pegasus is already like a better built ship than the Galactica.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Like,
if they were going to abandon one, I do think maybe abandon the Big G, but they didn't coordinate this plan. And Pegasus has time to prep for this because they know the rally point, they know the meeting point. So we can get our people out of here on Raptors safely and on time. These guys aren't ready for it, but maybe they could have coordinated it. Maybe I mean, I guess like Bill's thought was, if you're going to lead humanity forward, you should have the good ship.
Right, exactly. The good ship lollipop. And it is a sweet treat to bring in here. Do you think Admiral Kane's Force Ghost is just so pissed off? She's like, we brought this newfangled ship in with all these new characters, and you kill us all off, and then you kill the ship. I do kind of feel bad for Lee, because I do think putting him in that position of command, not to say that he's not going to get it here on the Big G, but I think it is a really interesting story beat that unfortunately goes a bit unexplored, considering that we don't see his time as commander of the Pegasus, really. But yeah, to go back to what you said before, just to clarify, I also did not believe that Lee was like, damn it, Dad, you can't tell me what to do. I truly think it was Lee speaking to his own instincts. I mean, again, we talked about this before, that this was a guy who at least initially was kind of like the moral compass of the show. That was the guy that was initially questioning, his own father's actions as well as Laura Rosling's actions, to the point where he does commit a bit of mutiny and, pull a gun on Colonel Tigh at the end of season 1. And so it does make sense for me. And it is a nice way to wrap up also the soft arc of the first 4 episodes of Lee being the one to really propose, like, they're left behind. I know you have personal reasons to go back. We need to keep moving forward. Everything, either we go back to everything has happened before everything has happened again, or whether we talk about sort of the sins of the father being put upon the sins of the son. Lee decides to, do his best Adama impression by coming in with his own big, bold plan, makes the sacrifice play, and in the process is able to save a heap tons of people.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to the insurgents get to the detention center. Sam finds Starbuck, and she's like, "Oh, Sam, wait, where's my daughter?
Where's Casey?" And Anders incredibly confused because first off, this is the first time he saw his wife, who he had like at least a 50% chance of thinking that she was dead. And so he's elated beyond belief. And she's like, "Wait a minute, where's this person who you've never met before?" And so she ends up taking off and, we'll find out later there are a few complications that come with that in multiple ways.
Just a couple. Okay, on Colonial One, Doral's like, we've lost control. The rest of the civilian fleet is starting to lift off. They're getting out of here. Simon says, we've got a heavy raider on standby to evacuate us. Meanwhile, I'm kind of just like, why don't y'all just like do like a quick boop? Just like
Cavill said how painful it is. Maybe they just wanted to like really not want to do that, which we'll also talk about with Leoben. Like, I didn't realize this last week when Cavill brought up how increasingly painful it was to keep coming back. Like, God, Leoben must have had such a freaking crush on Starbuck.
Yeah, maybe
he's died 5 times.
Well, also maybe it explains some of his agita. Is that like he died 5 times? This is the 6th. And if it's like, and Cavill had died 3 times and it was starting to hurt. So like maybe like this is just driving Leoben even. I'm not out here trying to justify Leoben's actions, so I'm just going to stop. Deanna tells Baltar, "Do you want to come on this heavy raider with us?" And Baltar says, "What? Me?" And Deanna says, "Well, you were right. We were wrong. That's got to count for something."
Yeah, but also we could definitely weaponize you as some sort of tool.
Probably. As she leaves and Caprica 6 is telling Baltar, "We got to go," and Gaius is sitting there and he's saying, "I just want to die." Felix Gaeta says, "Let me give you your wish." And he holds a gun at him. And we cut away from that. But it's such a badass shot of Gaeta just like pointing the gun down. The camera's like up on him.
Yeah, but I really wish just put in the final cut shot of him smoking a cigarette with his sleeves rolled up and add the gun onto that. It would be far and away the most badass image of this character in his existence.
Yeah, it's not quite as cool as that scene, despite this is probably the second coolest Gaeta look. Other than him like walking away with like the little dog walking behind him, like into
with the coat turned up.
Yeah, that's pretty cool too. Gaeta's had a pretty
Oh no, did Jake make it off New Caprica?
Hope so.
No, you know what? I think the Cylons adopted him because they were the nicest to Jake, it seems. Deanna even knew his name.
Yeah. So back up in the air, we are seeing the Pegasus taking a beating. They don't have a single bird in the air. Adama realizes that Lee left his Vipers guarding the civilian fleet and tells Hilo that means he's evacuating. Like, he's going to be all right. So we got to get out of here, too. So he orders the Galactica to jump. So Gaeta, we'll go back to Gaeta now on Colonial One. Like, I trusted you. You were the chosen one.
And he has the higher ground at this point. Because, he believed in the dream of Gaius Baltar. He led us to the apocalypse. And Baltar's saying, like, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm not going to dispute any of that. And this is where Gaius Baltar, despite being at his most despondent, is still having a charisma score of 20, is able to talk his way out of any situation, is basically like, look, Cylon's plan right now is to nuke the planet to get as many civilian casualties as possible.
Yeah.
I'm one of the only people that can stop her at this point. You can either kill me right now and the human race dies with me, or you can let me go. Worst case, I still die and the human race dies along with me. Best case, I save you all and maybe redeem myself in the eyes of my was Gaeta like officially confirmed as his vice president, or just like, I don't know, chief of staff, someone close to him?
I can't remember if he's vice president or chief of staff.
Because I know that Zarek was the former vice president.
Yeah. So I can't remember if Gaeta's vice president or if he's just chief of staff at this point. Either way, he's close enough to him, but he will let Gaius go, because Gaius wants to stop Deanna from detonating a nuke that's in the complex that will wipe everybody off of the planet. And Baltar's like, either way, humanity dies with me. So what do you want to do, Felix? And Felix says,
and he even does the badass thing of like holding the gun under his chin. Like, dude,
I don't even think it's badass. I think it's desperate. I think like I believe in this moment that Baltar's like, either way, man, one way or the other, I'll stop the bomb or you can shoot me. I honestly, like, it would be a relief.
Yeah. That's true as well. Again, it's win-win for him too, of like, listen, if I die, there's a lot of fringe benefits to that due to the fact that I'm not living. And if I live, at least I'm going to try to live actually standing up for myself for once, die on your feet rather than live on your knees.
The Pegasus explodes. The Pegasus, Lee leaves, everybody leaves. The Pegasus flies directly into some base stars, takes out a couple of others, just goes apart.
Good.
Man, this episode rules. We're talking mostly about action-packed stuff, but there's still obviously moments where there's great character beats, really good dialogue, really emotional moments, and the action is so sick. This is as elite of a Battlestar Galactica episode as you can get. This is all the things that you could possibly want from the show.
Yeah, it's freaking fantastic. This is one of these episodes that I wish I had watched on a big screen just to see.
Me too.
Again, the huge spectacle of not only the Big G's entrance into New Caprica, but this, where the Pegasus just outright drives itself into a base star. I really want the feel of the grandeur of it. Because a Cylon base star is pretty massive, and so is the Pegasus. So this must have just been absolute wreckage. As much as New Caprica didn't get nuclearly annihilated, it's going to probably be dealing with so much space junk falling into its orbit for the next 15 million years.
Yeah, it's going to get rocked. Okay, so we get to the Starbuck versus Leoben scene where he shows up to find her daughter, Casey, and Leoben shows up as well. Say the words. Say it. Say it. From evil.
Moonchild.
Moonchild. I get down on your knees and tell me you love me. I love you. She stabs him. He dies again.
Yeah, and I definitely thought this was the case. Yes, we had this brief tease of, oh no, could Starbuck actually be falling for Leoben? But I compared it even back then to the whole Sansa and Arya. Wait a minute, are they actually fighting? No, it was all a ruse. These are two of the most strong-willed characters in the show. Same thing with Starbuck. 4 months of being a prisoner could not break this woman's pride and stride. If anything, it made it even more bold that she is able to slip in the knife here. I was afraid that Sam was going to walk in during this moment, and then we get this whole misconstrued notion of I can't believe you fell in love with the Cylon. Luckily, we bypass all that in lieu of just an incredible revenge narrative from Starbuck, where she is able to give him basically what he wants, but then quite literally digs the knife in and says, yeah, all of that was false, by the way.
It would be like if when Sawyer asked Kate for a kiss back at the first season of Lost, if she did it and then slid a bamboo shoot under his fingernails. It's like that. And so she does that, and good Lord, is that justified?
And also this, listen, Casey is going to have to deal with a lot of shit once she gets in the heads of her mom, but she could be like, that lady killed a guy. I saw it. She's just kind of meeping around. I mean, to be fair, she might still have severe head trauma.
So far, Casey appears to not have words yet. So maybe she's going to be very lucky and forget this stuff. Baltar and Caprica 6, they go in search of Deanna, and Deanna is off in search of Hera. And she says that the prophet was a liar. All of this sucks. We hear a crying baby.
And... Yep. This is what I thought was gonna happen last week, Josh.
Yeah. They found Hera. It's Hera. It's the daughter of
her.
It's the daughter of Carl and Sharon Agathon, and she is now officially in Cylon custody.
Yeah, so while the Cylons will take a big L in this episode, as we'll get into later, it comes with
A
the
notable
yeah,
win. Yeah.
a little sweet and bittersweet, if you will, in that they're like, yeah, screw this. Like, screw humanity. We don't need to deal with them anymore. We have whatever we need with this, whether it's just serving as more so like a religious symbol of some sort of messiah, or whether quite literally this baby does factor into the Cylon's plans. They were able to succeed in this goal when up until like yesterday or earlier today, they thought it was an impossibility. So I think it's a really fun cliffhanger for the Cylons. And I'm assuming now Gaius Baltar in tow, because, you know, he, remember, is certainly involved in this as well. We had that entire ending scene in season 1 where down on Cobol, we have, you know, Caprica, or sorry, Head 6 telling him, like, this is our child, you know,
Shape of things to come.
yeah, they will be the savior of, you know, Cylon and humanity. And it's interesting as well. I think for the first time, Josh, we have sort of Parent Trap style Caprica 6 and Head 6 in the same scene.
Yeah, too many sixes.
But it also is going to be very interesting because
A hard 6.
Because I had rationalized last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, that when Caprica 6 got just like shot in the head, a temporary inconvenience, that then Head 6 appears to Gaius. And I was like, oh, is that Caprica 6? It seems like these are two very separate entities. And so, you know, I don't know if Caprica 6, I mean, I guess Caprica 6 also has her own head Baltar, so she might also be on board with like, yeah, we're the two that are going to lead this new, you know, mixed family into the new age of the Cylons. But at the same time, it's becoming an increasingly complicated situation.
So we go back to space. Rosalind reboards Colonial One. She's the last one to leave. They leave. We're back in space. We're at the Galactica. We've got a complete civilian fleet. Chief is thrilled to see Starbuck. Starbuck is thrilled to see Chief. Casey's mom is thrilled to see.
Got it going on.
She's got it going on.
Yeah, I loved this so much. This was such a great twist because I don't know. It's like
you bought it. You bought it. You thought that this
yeah.
was real, and like it turns out on the other side of this, like it was just another one of Leo Bin's disgusting head games.
And like it should have been, right? When you look back to Flesh and Bone, the rare time that Leo Bin actually appears in a good light, this was exactly it. That he whispers to Rosalind, Adama is a Cylon.
Right.
Like this is this guy's playbook, and so I think us being in the shoes of Starbuck and truly being led to believe in the last episode, like, okay, maybe this is, I mean, certainly him invoking the farm, like there is a non-zero chance that, yeah, maybe some stuff was harvested from Caprica. I bought it hook, line, and sinker. I think as well because I had bought into the possibilities of the character beat of, as I mentioned before, oh, this is one of the more immature characters on the show. And the fact that she would have to raise a kid, what would that do for her? Turns out to not be the case. I would also say it's like a little low-key funny as well. But it's like, oh, no, actually, this is my daughter the entire time. And this is definitely to a lesser extent than Tigh. But I'm going to imagine there will be at least one episode. We are going to get a Starbucks-centric episode this season that is going to deal with the fallout of this. Because I think it's going to be very tough to put the toothpaste back in
this
that
is not
tube.
A thing you just get over, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think it's less so even like oh, Casey imprinted in me and I miss her. I think it's more so her idea of like, okay, is this where I find my satisfaction now? Because we've certainly talked about that with the character of her finding meaning. You know, the reason why she escaped to the stars is because she failed to find any of that on Caprica proper and with her family. And so maybe the idea of starting her own family after she's had such a fractured relationship with them is something that she didn't know she wanted until the erroneous opportunity presented itself. So a really interesting position to leave Starbuck that might lead to some friction between her and Anders. I think Anders is going to be a good enough guy to, like, when she says it's complicated, that he'll try to understand her situation and support her. But I think you can only really support her to a certain extent considering everything she's been through.
Are you surprised Anders made it? You thought Anders was going down.
I thought there was a good chance that he might go. Surprisingly, and again, maybe this shows how much the Cylons botched it, very little casualties on the human side. It pretty much is only Maya as the named characters that got taken out.
Yeah.
Every other person made it out alive.
We did it because
That's
Bill Adama's a badass who figured this thing out.
That's pretty damn terrible, though. You have dozens upon dozens of named characters, and one dies.
Yeah.
Like, you should be going from first billing down on the call sheet and picking it up. I know you tried to do that with Cavill's big plan, but man, just massive, massive loss on the Cylon.
Big whiff on the Cylon part. Yeah.
Yeah.
No
So I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out Anders' place. Like, he definitely has warmed up as a character to me from kind of the nothing burger he presented himself as last season. I still don't really get the him and Starbuck stuff, but I'm assuming now that we'll actually see them, I don't know, interact with each other for more than 2 scenes at a time, I guess I'll see it more.
So the episode ends with everybody back on the Big G, a great reunion between Bill and Lee. You must not have understood my orders. Lee says, I never could read your handwriting.
He said I couldn't hear through my fat ears.
Yeah. Tigh asks permission to come aboard. Permission granted. Bill gives him the credit as the leader of the resistance. You saved them all. And Tigh says, not all of them.
The most emotional I've been this season so far is, again, not only the performance from Michael Hogan, but you could tell that for a guy that, as much as I was saying, was loyal to the soil and was willing to do whatever, sacrifice whatever to get this big win, you could tell that, like, this is a guy who left part of his heart on New Caprica, and that this might have been a bit of a step too far, and that even when one of the most hardened characters, one of the characters least likely to show their emotions besides at the bottom of a bottle, is basically trying to, like, stifle sobs as he gets what he wants in the end. It makes me feel so much for him, but God, it makes me so excited for what we're going to do with this character moving forward. You know, with this show, as well as, you know, Josh, you and I love playing D&D. Like, trauma is basically baked in at this point for good character stories. And everyone on this show has suffered a good amount of trauma, but Saul has a very fresh dose of it. And we shall see how he acts upon that.
Rosalind finds out that Maya and Hera didn't make it, and Tori takes it as like, I failed you. And Rosalind says to her, you didn't. This is bigger than us, which again felt very poignant.
This is life.
Of this feeling of like, this horrific event has happened because of me somehow. You know what I mean? Like, this feeling of like, I didn't do enough. And Rosalind with the reality check of like, you cannot think that way. This is not on you. This is bigger than you. Like, this is bigger than me. It's bigger than all of us. And, you know, we're going to deal with it. And that hit today.
Yeah. I think there is this idea of powerlessness that comes sort of like at the falling apart of power, of like, oh my God, I thought this, I was put in charge from Tori's perspective of this one thing, and it quite literally happened when I wasn't looking, and she takes personal responsibility for it. I would say from a comparable perspective, I think it's a little less like completely on maybe some of us in terms of the responsibility that you take, but you can't help as a human, or at least from my perspective, where I am someone who often tries to like think through, mistakes that occur or bad things that happen and try to, use it as a learning movement and say, okay, what could I have done differently? How will I do better next time? It's aggravating, yet almost freeing to know that sometimes you do the best that you can do and things just don't work. That's helped me at least try to eliminate a good amount of my, at least initial surface laden anxieties of like, sometimes you have to let go of what you can't control. And especially from Rosalind's
Was that not the lesson of Lost, you know?
Exactly. And from Rosalind's perspective as well, like, I don't think this is specifically religiously based, but she kind of has this sort of like let go and let God mentality to this. Of like, there was a bigger plan in store. It's bound to happen. I mean, we should also say that perhaps still on the table is that prophecy of Laura Rosalind leading everyone to Earth, but at the cost of her life. I would imagine that might be something that gets brought up later on as well. So yeah, it was kind of it was one of those very salient moments, to your point, in terms of my own mental check-ins, what I've been trying to do personally, to have that character bring to life a mantra that I've tried to convince myself of for the better part of 10 years. Sometimes you need it, you know? Sometimes you could keep telling yourself stuff and you won't believe yourself, and you need that third party to come in and give you the advice that you need. And sometimes it's the form of this embattled school teacher who has recently reascended to her position as the president and is checking over all of these cornerless dossiers to figure out what to do next.
The episode ends with one major fleet casualty. Adama kills his mustache. He shaves and he returns to the deck. The number of surviving humans is 41,435, down from 49,550 when New Caprica was settled.
Yeah.
You don't have those numbers to spare. That's a big chunk.
Listen, I'm thrilled that he shaved the mustache. I am elated. Listen, certainly he is not the character who is having to go through the worst things from a cosmetic perspective at the prompting of the people behind the scenes, but like, it kind of would have sucked if Edward James almost had to rock a Ron Swanson mustache for the rest of the series. Like, babyface Adama is where it's at. And so in a meaningful gesture, he ends up shaving. And I think it also hammers home a point that, as I mentioned before, coming full circle, everything has happened before, everything will happen again. He steps out of his ready room and just kind of, we do this, pan out shot of him standing in the hallways as everyone's kind of milling about. And it is a far call from where things were 4 months ago, where again, he was operating basically a ghost ship and was the only person walking down the hallway, to see everything teeming with life again. Yes, it possibly comes at the cost of like, the Cylons have the baby and the Cylons might still be hunting down the humans now that Deanna has espoused this idea of like, we are never going to forget this. We are never going to let you go. But at the same time, a new normal has been established, emphasis on normal. And for Bill Adama, he has the facial hair or lack thereof to establish that.
So let's do MVPs and LVPs, and let's just start right there, because you and I are both going to take a shot at Bill Adama. This thing doesn't happen.
Are we, Boomer?
Yeah, this thing doesn't happen without Bill Adama's courage, mustache or no.
Yeah, I mean, his plan went off without a hitch. And at least from our perspective, this wasn't like a hand of God situation where like a character steps in and says, oh, actually, this is my part of the plan. I'm taking this to assume that this was all Bill Adama's harebrained idea. You could even say that we gave Baby Boomer her flowers last week, and he was the one to come up with the idea to send her down there in the first place. And so, yeah, it is far and away the most impressive thing anyone has done in the show up until this point. Just think about this, Josh. This planet was under lock and key, besieged by the enemy and watched over for 4 months. The fleet was reduced to just the Pegasus and Galactica, and they got away, rescuing nearly everybody, staving away the Cylons, and only one named character died? There's barely any blood on this man's hands, let alone his mustache. We deserve all the Adama chants and weird Rooney moments where he's lifted on everybody's shoulders. I think he deserves that for the rest of his life. Give him all the flowers, please. Unfortunately, we can only give him 2 points, as we'll talk about, but all the flowers metaphorically.
Well, 2 points makes him the season 3 MVP so far. He just passed Baby Boomer. So Bill Adama, with your point in mind, is at 4, Baby Boomer at 3. You gave your other MVP point this week to another Adama, to Lee.
Listen, you know I'm a Lee simp. Whenever he does something that is objectively good, I got to put my boy on the board here. And after stewing in his feels, again, being a bit limo for the first 3, he turns into Stitch and decides to start going crazy here, surfing in like a big wave on the Pegasus. And even though he lost the ship that he was briefly in command of, he gains a point from me.
My next point goes to Colonel Tigh.
Yeah.
Bill gives him the credit, right? He says, you saved him. Tigh says not all of them, and that is definitely true. But this operation doesn't happen without, I think, like really the coordinated efforts of him, Chief, and Sam are sort of like the quorum with like Rosalind and Tori in the mix as well. But Tigh is the one who like observably, literally, like I think, and probably this is part of the thought underneath it, or it's at least a coincidence. Like he cut pieces of himself off to do this, right? Like he lost an eye. He lost parts of himself. He lost Ellen. Like he lost so much.
You could argue he lost the most out of all these characters on New Caprica. Like obviously, what's his name? Duck lost a lot more, which is why he chooses to do what he does in the first episode. But out of all our main characters,
main cast, yes.
Yeah, Starbuck is back with Anders. Callie and Chief are doing well, and they still have their baby. Like, and that'll make Saul's existence really interesting as well moving forward, is because he might have a bit of resentment towards the surviving characters too, despite the fact that he was the one to lead them all to safety. He is the one that, from our perspective, has seemed to be the only one to sacrifice anything in pursuit of that.
Right. So I think it leaves him in a really compelling place.
Yeah.
I've said multiple times that Tigh is my favorite character. And so like where we are with him right now is so fascinating. And I'm looking forward to talking through the rest. My final point, I'm going to give it to the fleet writ large.
I think this is the first time we've ever given a point to the fleet.
Well, we give so many demerits to the Cylons, including this week. You're going to tap the Cylons twice in the LVPs.
I mean, they suffer some pretty bad losses.
Lord knows they deserve it. But I think in that same breath, like on this one specifically, give the credit to Bill, give the credit to Tigh, give the credit to Lee all you want. But this is a massive group effort of like all of the survivors of humanity rallying together, even if it's as simple as people running to ships. You know what I mean? Like everybody doing their part. And I think it is such a joyous victory to see them get out of this horrible situation in such a coordinated fashion that I can't help but give a point to the fleet. So you're giving 2 to the Cylons, and then we're both gonna hit Leoben because he sucks.
Yeah, I mean, 1 for being a sucky person and like really manipulating Kara through the last few minutes of his life by being like, yeah, kiss me and tell me you love me. Just outright sociopathic behavior. But also, he ends up getting egg all over his face and probably his own organs, as like she gets the last laugh. It turns out that she just tricked him the entire time, and this absolute doof is left dead for the 6th and hopefully final time. What I do think is interesting as well, going back to your point for the fleet, is that, it does represent the communal effort. And that's what I really like about this as well, to go back to a point that you made at the very beginning of this podcast, is that as much as we had certain characters leading the way in certain parts, it really does seem like everyone had a job to do. Even someone like Tori, right, was kind of the block captain and was able to deploy everybody. And so it does represent...
Tori does great work.
Yeah, and so it does represent the fact that, at its core, the reason why humanity survived for the first 2 seasons and will continue to survive is that they work better together. If they don't live together, they are going to die alone. And I don't think it's a coincidence that things looked most dire when they were separated, when there was a group that was left behind under the boot of the Cylons. But the reason why they were able to overcome that is because once they actually started communicating with each other, they got on the same page and they were able to all swoop in at opportune moments and truly catch the Cylons, sleeping, which I think is also why they have to get so many demerits. This is like the 28-3 of Battlestar Galactica. You had complete control of this planet, of the presidency. You tried all these maneuvers. They still weren't working. And then Adama freaking drops into your atmosphere and deploys a bunch of Vipers to take out everybody, rescue the civilians, and then they blip out again with no named characters dying except for 1. Shame on you, Cylon. Cylons 2.0. Maybe a little too much bark and no bite, considering what we saw from them.
I'm glad you brought it up because we were talking before about how no named main characters end up dying and how quickly we forget Ellen Tigh. We forget Ellen Tigh at our own peril, Mike Bloom. With that being said, she dies in this episode, so I gave her an LVP.
Wouldn't be an episode of BSG if Ellen Tigh didn't get an LVP.
Although I love Kate Vernon as this character. I think she did a great job. Obviously, Mike, this is a show that has occasional flashbacks and stuff. Very clearly, I think the people involved in Battlestar Galactica love Kate Vernon as well. So don't be surprised, if we revisit the character in some way, shape, or form at some point.
I'm totally imagining some sort of like Tigh drinks absinthe and starts hallucinating his wife or something like that.
Right.
We could very easily get Ghost Ellen going on.
Okay, this week, the Cylons versus the Fleet. Who won?
Okay. All right, next up.
So currently it's 2-2. The Fleet versus the Cylons. No Colonel ties. 17 for the Fleet overall. 11 for the Cylons. 7 ties overall. Rating this episode, Mike, this is the cleanest 4.2 that I've given on Battlestar Galactica thus far.
Wow, is this your favorite episode of the show so far?
I think so. I think so. I mean, it's just such an event, and one of the things that I love is that it happens so. I actually do think I like that it happens so fast. I would have liked maybe like 2 to 4 more episodes on New Caprica. I do think I would have liked to have spent more time here. Again, this is a show that deals with some measure of flashback, so maybe we will see New Caprica again. But at least in this,
we're gonna see more of it next week.
At least in this like consecutive chunk, So I love the capper to it. I think so fondly about this period of BSG because I think it has so much to say. I think it does so much. I think it does such a great job transforming and radicalizing so many of these characters and activating like the in some ways the darkest and in other ways the purest distillations of these characters. I think that oppression, true oppression, can strip you bare. And who are you when you are that? I think it can be a very ugly answer, and I think it sometimes can be an affirming answer. And I think you see both of that with many of these characters in, exhibiting those two traits and more. I think Exodus is sort of like the cherry on the top of this arc. These 4 episodes that we've talked about through season 3 thus far are like, this is maybe like my the brig through the looking glass of Battlestar Galactica.
Interesting. So all downhill from here is what you're
not
implying.
all downhill
no.
But like just like a real, for me, just like an extraordinarily wonderful, memorable arc on Battlestar Galactica.
To your point, I am so excited to see how this impacts a lot of our characters, because something I really enjoyed about our time on New Caprica is we spoke about this in the very first episode. The 3 leaders of the resistance were Colonel Tigh, who completely bungled his first chance at taking the lead at the beginning of season 2. Chief Tyrrell, who, for understandable reasons, was kind of like in the background in his own feels in season 2. And Sam Anders, who like nobody knew from a hole in the wall until he randomly gets picked up in the season 2 finale. I mean, even look at a character like Ellen, who had largely been used as like a comic relief or the thorn in the heel of the plot, who ends up having her own moment of self-sacrifice. Like, this was something that demonstrably showed what some of our characters would do when their backs were against the wall and then some. I think it was a really cool opportunity, and I think it was a really good idea to do things like putting the Adamas out in deep space, having Starbuck, unfortunately, under lock and key, having Laura Roslin, with a couple of exceptions, like pretty much in the background, having Baltar meekly being sat there as just kind of like a representation of the Cylon government. Like, they really sideline a bunch of our main characters in retrospect in honor of some of these more secondary characters to come to the forefront. Yes. And that makes me really excited, because that's, it's almost the opposite of Lost, right? Where Lost starts with this sprawling ensemble and then kind of winnows down to like it basically being a story of Jack, Kate, Hurley, Sawyer, and Locke. Here, they start with that subset of main characters, and at least they allow for an opportunity, maybe temporarily, maybe permanently, to really balloon out and check in with a bunch of these characters. That being said, there's going to be a lot to juggle. I'm assuming we're now going to kind of move back to our story of the week model, where I think we're going to check in with various characters from time to time, and then they'll kind of ebb back into the background. But I am so appreciative of this. We have talked continuously since the very beginning about the fact that BSG swings at every pitch that is thrown their way. This has to be the biggest grand slam that the show has hit up to this point, from the initial surprise of the time jump to the surprise on top of the surprise immediately following of the Cylon invasion, to everything that happened in these first 4 episodes. I mean, for me, I go back and forth. Like, I think right now, Exodus Part 2 for me is almost equivalent to like Through the Looking Glass of if I'm thinking about what my favorite or best episode is, I think this is the best episode of BSG so far. My heart still might be with an episode like Flesh and Bone, which is more like The Constant, more self-contained and speaks to the themes of the show.
I was just thinking about this because I think I agree, and for me, it's Hand of God, maybe.
Yeah, so I think they're much like we talked about with Lost. I think when you're asked about what's the best episode of the show versus like what best represents the show, I think those are two different conversations. And I truly think what we got to experience from Exodus in episode 4.
I know.
Like, it's wild to think about. Usually this type of stuff is reserved for a finale. Most shows would do that. But BSG is not like most shows.
And they've got 16 episodes still to go in season 3. So,
Yeah.
you know, like we've got like a very tough act to follow.
I can't wait for new Caprica.
We'll see. Nanu Caprica. Okay, so that's a 4.2 from Mike as well. So it's you guys
if it wasn't.
You guys send in your scores as well down the hatch, rhap@gmail.com.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking as I was watching it was like, if we still have to deal with the unsavory Starbuck Leobin stuff, that might take it down to a 4.1, but that ended in such a satisfying fashion. So it got the full marks for me.
Okay, there's some deleted scenes in this one. Adama tells Kat that you're gonna lead the mission. He calls her Luann.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. Kat is sort of nervously looking over everything that's happening as they're preparing for the launch, and Adama's like, "Do you believe in God, Luann?" And she's like, "I didn't know you knew my name nor the writers." And he talks about how I know you more than a lot of people on this ship. He says that because he grew up and he was smaller than everybody else, basically there were two ways out. Either you talked your way out of a fight or you let the snot get kicked out of you, and then you let people respect you. The old, I guess, Jack Shepherd way of doing things. He tells her, "You got here under your own power. Every morning you wake up and tie your hair back. Then you go to war. That's all that matters to me."
Good Lord. Another scene, Adama does a floor walk.
Yeah, they do a little bit of like a walk and don't talk. They follow him through the hallways. Then he walks into the CIC, and then it's just like everything thrown at him at once. Because now it's basically like an extended version of the ending where now everyone's coming at him being like, okay, do we take care of the civilians? Right now, what do we do with all these refugees that we brought in? Should we fix up the Galactica? And Adama says his primary motivation right now is that they got to rescue a lot of pilots, but at the same time, these pilots have not been in a cockpit for a year and a half. And so they're going to need some training again. They're going to need someone to train them. And this is where he gives Lee the good/bad news that he is CAG once more.
CAG. Okay, well, TBD on how that's going to go. 5 jumps to add to Count Jumpula, the Galactica jumping in, then out of the New Caprica atmosphere, the fleet jumping away from New Caprica, the Galactica jumping away from the Battlestar attack, and the Pegasus emergency Raptors jumping away just before the Pegasus is destroyed. Current jump count is at 31, and we now officially have the best jump on the board. Exodus Part 2 contains 4 fracks only, which is, we don't have any fracking time to frack around.
Yeah, it's like 1 frack per 13 minutes.
Ellen gets a frack, one final frack on her way out the door.
What if that was her last word? Like,
I fracked them. Sam gets a frack, Gaeta gets a frack, Deanna gets a frack as well. We overall have 244 fracks on Battlestar Galactica at this point.
Nice square number.
Mike, you predicted that Starbuck and Apollo would frack within 41 episodes. Countdown is on 37 episodes down.
And look at this, reunited, and it feels so good.
Look, if we got out of New Caprica in 4 episodes, maybe
what can we get into in 4 episodes?
You are running swiftly out of time, sir. But let's see what we get.
I want to bring this up because I do think a low-key pet theory of mine is that Lee Adama sees Starbuck again, and all these memories get resuscitated. And as a result, he decides to like get jacked and swole again, and the era of fat suit Lee Adama is done.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens with all of that. No spoilers over here.
Yeah, much like Michael Hogan Tigh has to live with the fact that like, oh, I was the only one that really lost anything down there. Is Jamie Bamber have to be like, really? I'm the only one that has to permanently live with this major change? Well, Adama shaved his mustache? Really?
Yeah, he couldn't shave the suit. Any changes to the Cylon rankings?
So really the big debate for me is right now Leoben is below Deanna, which he will stay. The question is, does he fall below Aaron Doral? To me, and we talk about this a lot, especially when we were talking about some of the worst ranked episodes of Lost, I would rather be invested in the character that has high highs and low lows over a character that is, to be candid, now that we're like 2.25 seasons in or a fifth season in, a pretty big nothing burger. Like Aaron Doral had his time in the pilot in the miniseries as a fun little nuisance that ends up becoming Asylum, but it feels like he has done absolutely nada since. He was part of like the cadre that walked menacingly along Caprica in the first season, and then he's basically done bupkis. So because of Leo Bin's good work here, it slightly outpaces a lot of the bad stuff we've gotten so far in this season. So he is holding tight right now at number 5, but it is a tight 5. If Aaron Doral is actually able to get a storyline moving forward, or we see more of creepy Leoben for whatever reason, you better believe I am dropping it like the big G on the planet of New Caprica.
All right, we'll see where Leoben falls. Next week, Mike, we're going to watch the webisodes, the Resistance webisodes. We will talk about those. We're also going to talk about season 3, episode 5, Collaborators. What do you think is going to happen in season 3, episode 5, Mike?
Oh, so they're going to try to put on a talent show to raise everybody's spirits. And so everyone's going to try to come in with their best singing, dancing, stand-up comedy performance to bring everybody together. No, I think what they're going to focus on is actually what was outlined in the final deleted scene, which is like, okay, what do we do now? And there are a lot of different directions they could go, quite literally. And so I think this episode, despite how propulsive the plot tends to be on this show, I think we are going to spend an episode kind of sitting down and being like, where does the show go from here? What's the next thing we should be doing? Getting settled back into Laura Roslin as president, kind of settling back into the new normal that is everything that has happened, everything we are bringing up from New Caprica, or most importantly, leaving behind. I mentioned it before, but the whole Hera storyline, like, how is that going to affect Baby Boomer, who does not have really an appearance in this episode? How is that going to inform her character moving forward, Carl's character moving forward? I think it's going to be largely I wouldn't say chess pieces episode or a vibes episode, more so a kind of like sort of like a autopsy episode, kind of like taking a look at what happened and then planning ahead for what's to come for the foreseeable future.
Okay, well, we will see. We will be back next week talking Resistance and talking Collaborators here on Down the Hatch.
Okay, where can people watch these Resistance webisodes? Are they locally sourced?
I am not sure where the Resistance webisodes, Battlestar.
They're not on Prime or anything?
There is a YouTube called Battlestar Galactica Resistance Webisodes Complete Edit, posted by Manticore Escapee, Mike. It was posted April 6, 2020. All in, it's 30 minutes and 40 seconds.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, people can check it out on YouTube as well as the usual places. Just as a reminder, because I think somebody had reached out to me about it. As a reminder, Battlestar Galactica is available on Amazon Prime in the US for subscribers. So if you're looking for a place to watch, you don't have the hard copies, such as myself, you can watch alongside us. Now, we have officially lifted off into parts unknown with Prime, much like from New Caprica proper.
Yes. All right. Well, make sure you're subscribed. We will be back next week. Down the Hatch, Battlestar Galactica, wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch us on the YouTubes, the We Know Scripted TV, RHAP YouTube. You can send emails in, down the hatch, rhap@gmail.com. And you can thank the team behind the curtain, Ben and Brendan, for shipping all the information through the pneumatic tubes into your podcast feeds. Mike Bloom, what a delight. At a Mike Bloom type, wherever you can find him. What's going on? You just wrapped up the Penguin?
Just wrapped up the Penguin, which was awesome. I wouldn't say like delightful necessarily because it's an incredibly dark show, but very delightful to cover. One of the biggest surprise shows for me of the year, getting to cover that alongside Grace had its big ending. And speaking of another show that very much surprised me once I started covering it, Silo is returning to Apple TV Plus this coming Friday with its first episode. I mentioned this before in previous BSG episodes and in Lost episodes as well, but if you like mystery box character source post-apocalyptic dramas, that something tells me you do, if you're checking out this show and our coverage of it, you want to check out Silo. It's only 10 episodes in its first season, so you can binge right now in anticipation for season 2. And I'll be continuing my podcast coverage with Grace, where we did a big episode last week, basically catching everyone up, reminding them what they need to know about the show. And we're going to start our coverage of season 2 proper this coming Friday, alongside my typical stuff of TV for Real, the B&B. It's all out there at a Mike Bloom type, including on Blue Sky. Josh, much like the Blue Sky that the Big G ends up jumping out of, a new form of social media has jumped out of nowhere.
Yes, this is sort of a great week for Battlestar Galactica, this specific episode, because much like humanity jumping into all of the ships and fleeing New Caprica with force, so too are the Twitter expats finding Blue Sky. So Blue Sky really taking off on social media. I'm there as well, at Round Howard. I really stopped using Twitter for basically anything other than retweets and stuff. I'm posting a bunch on Blue Sky right now. Would love to see some of you guys, the hatchlings, over there as well.
You should say a very profuse amount of lost source GIFs exist.
Oh, it's great.
Blue
The GIF search engine is really good. The functionality is really great. The block and mute functionalities are exceptional. So it seems like a very safe, very friendly social media platform. So I'm loving it so far. Blue Sky, if you're not over there right now, at a Mike Bloom type for Mike, at Round Howard for me. Would love to see you over there. Say hi. Give us a little shout. Talk to us. We'll talk back. So join Blue Sky, and we'll see you all there. So next week, Mike, we got a lot of BSG ahead of us. We've got a whole ass 30-minute webisode series to talk about, as well as a 43-minute episode of TV to talk about as well.
That's like the length of the season 2 finale, so no biggie.
Look, if we watch the webisodes and we decide we have so much to say, like maybe we will chunk it out as its own podcast. But I think like let's watch them and talk about them in a chunk rather than like breaking them down piece by piece.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just going to be here for too long. We don't do 3-hour podcasts here on Down the Hatch anymore, unless it really warrants it. Webisodes don't really warrant it. But we're going to watch them. We're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about collaborators and all of this good stuff when Down the Hatch returns next week. Hope you're all staying safe and healthy and as good as humanly possible out there. And until then, we'll see you soon. Boy.